Lamed Aleph, good evening. Tonight we're going to be learning Eruvin. Daf Lamed Aleph. We are more than a third, is that right? Or almost a third, I should say. Almost a third done with this very simple Masechta, which is not nuanced, not abstract at all, and doesn't require a picture book to navigate. So we're going to learn Daf Lamed Aleph. We're on the bottom of Lamed Amud Beis, and we're starting at the two dots that are about 8 or 9 lines from the bottom of the page. If you'll recall from the previous Mishnah, we were discussing some of the locations of where an Eruv can be located, and if those locations could, in theory, be limiting in such a way where it might cause for a problem. So we said, Ula Kohen beveis hapras, that a Kohen, even if the Eruv was in a place that's called a beis hapras, so a beis hapras is a place where there was a kever that was, at some point, there was a mace that was buried there, and the field was kind of plowed over. So we don't exactly know where the mace is, if it's still there, maybe the body's decomposed, but we know that there was a mace there at some point. So there the Mishnah said that that's mutter. So opens the Gemara here. If you just blow the dirt in front of you as you walk, as long as no significant bones are protruding, we make a halachic assumption that any bones that might exist are pachos mikisa, or they're very small, even smaller than a pearl of barley, and that's not problematic. Rabbi Yehuda bar Ami mishmid Rabbi Yehuda Amar beis hapras shenidash tahor. If you have a field that's been totally plowed over, like I mean start to finish, not like we went over it once and we're not sure what happened to the mace, but a total replow, so then the din is that place is now completely tahor and there's no problem at all. But the important exception here is that we allow the Eruv to go into this space of the beis hapras. That's considered an acceptable place for there to be an Eruv. Continues the Gemara, 7 lines from the bottom of the page. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af beis hakvaros. The Mishnah took it even further. Okay, you want to tell me beis hapras, it's a mokum safek, I got you. But beis hakvaros, that's a vadai. People intentionally bury mason there. How does that work out? So we said in our Mishnah, and it's quoted here again, Tana, the Kohen could, in theory, go into that space inside of a box that could function as an ohel, can function as a tent of some kind. An enclosure, I should say, is probably a better English word. And in fact, the Mishnah and the Gemara infers from this Mishnah, kasavar ohel zaruk shmei ohel, that if you have an encapsulated space that the Kohen in theory could sit in, and he was kind of shoved in there, then that would be considered an appropriate ohel. One, that would be mafsik, the tumah from underneath him, and therefore it's considered a space in which an Eruv can exist. Says the Gemara, ubeplugta dehani tanoi. This shita of our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, this shita is subject to a machlokes of another nature, though connected, of course, to Tanya. The Brisa writes, "Hanichnas le'eretz ha'amim b'shita table migdal, Rabbi mitame, Rabbi Yosi, b'Rabbi Yehuda mitaher." There was an Isser Derabanan in general for a person to go to Chutz La'aretz because people in Chutz La'aretz were not keeping good track of the Beis HaKvaros. In Eretz Yisrael, people were more makbid because there are a lot of Jews there, so we knew approximately where the Beis HaKvaros were. We had demarcations. We knew what was going on. But outside of Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, people were not as makbid on Kvura. We know that we have a mitzvah d'oraisa to do Kvura. And that's why in Eretz Yisrael, they're extremely quick to perform this mitzvah. Sometimes it can be very hard on the families. I mean, in Israel, they're used to it. But if you have an American, things move so rapidly in order to fulfill this mitzvah and make sure that the mace has its appropriate cover. So in Chutz La'aretz, we were very concerned because they were not taking good care of the mason. So there was a stam, an Isser Derabanan for a Kohen to be in Chutz La'aretz. Why today is it different? So today it's different because we have actual state and federal guidelines about you can't bury someone wherever you want. We have to be in a place with a certain licensure. It's a little bit of a different animal, much more of a different animal. So that's why some Kohanim live in Chutz La'aretz. But the Gemara does have this predated, this very old custom, minhag, or Isser Derabanan, really, to be in Eretz Ha'amim. Anyways, there's a machlokas about that. And if you went into Eretz Ha'amim, into Chutz La'aretz, b'shida table migdal, inside of a box, machlokas tanaim. Rabbi says that you're tamei even in the box. Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda says you're not. B'mai kamiflagei. It's the same machlokas that was already hinted to. Mar savar ohel zaruk lav shmei ohel. According to Rabbi, he says that an ohel zaruk, if a kohen is inside an encapsulated space and it hovers over a space where there's a mace, that's a lav shmei ohel. It's not an ohel. Namely, you're not separated from the mace, and therefore you are tamei. Omar savar ohel zaruk shmei ohel. This follows the shita of Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Yehuda, who seems to say that an ohel zaruk is shmei ohel, that if you're inside this encapsulated space, we do consider that to be an enclosure, one that protects you from the tumah, and therefore he holds that it's tahor. So that's how the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah, who allows it, Beveis HaKvaros, clearly follows the opinion of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, that is Mitayr. Says the Gemara, V'hatanya, changing gears, that's not V'hatatanya. V'hatanya, Rabbi Yehuda himself, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Me'arvin l'kohen tar b'truma tehora bekever. That the food is even going to be, the truma food is even going to be fine if it's on top of a kever. Well, now we're not talking about a random place inside of a beis hakvaros. It's sitting on top of a mace. So what's the kohen going to do? Tumas ohel is ole ad rakia. So if you stand on top, I remember when I was younger, I went to Tzfas and we were there in the beis hakvaros. My wife and I went there. We saw all the great Gedolim, the Beis Yosef, Rav Alkabetz, all these, Abai and Rava, I think, are buried there as well. Rav Pinchas ben Yair, the famous brisa that is the root of Mesilas Yesharim, is buried there as well. So Am Yisrael, so you can walk in a respectful way. You can't step on a kever, but if you happen to pass over a little bit of your body, so fine, that's not an Isser Daraisa, it's mutter. Even by an Ashes Kohen, it's mutter. That's why a lot of shilas come up about a woman who's pregnant. Can a woman who's an Ashes Kohen, can she go into a Beis HaKvaros because maybe the baby's a boy? So a bunch of shilas. Is she actually having a boy? Subject number one. What? Yeah, she is. She. I don't think you want to call her. You don't want to call her an oversized tent. It probably will not go over well. That's a great point. I'm not going to say who said that comment here on YouTube, David Merzel. So that's the Gemara's question. This is a little different than saying it's in a basic verse. It's mamish on a kever. Come on, how is that eligible for an eruv? It's totally inaccessible.
Isn't it like the Yayin with the Nazar?
Yeah.
And all these other cases that we've had.
But that was a content question, and here the Mishnah is dealing with location. Here the location is crippling. The food, we said, is different because it's chazi for somebody else. Here the location he can't even get to. He's totally inaccessible to him. So the Gemara is going to try and figure out how he got there. It just says the Gemara, top of Lamed Aleph from Aleph, 2 lines down, Heichi Azil. How would he do this? Answers the Gemara, B'shida Teva Migdal. It's Rabbi Yehuda L'shitaso. Rabbi Yehuda says, go inside this encapsulated space, you'll be fine. But once the food touches the kever, tamula, the food's going to become tameh. So even if he could magically get in there, so what? The food's still tameh, in which case, now we're back to the Nazir question. We're back to like the Kohen Yisrael versus Truma. Now the food is completely tameh for him to eat. So what's he supposed to do? So says the Gemara, no, the food is not tameh. Why not? Because it's true that the din of tumas ohel ola adar rakia applies to people, but it doesn't apply to food. The only way food can become tameh is if it's huchshar l'tumah. So says the Gemara, b'shalo huchshara, the food that was not moist with one of these 7 liquids of yad shachadam, as we've learned about many times since we began Shas, shenilo shebemei peros, or that the liquid that it has in it is not one of the yad shachadam liquids. It's apple juice. Apple juice is mostly water. We don't look at it that way. It has to be pure water in order to be the mem of yad shachadam. So here the Gemara says the food that's sitting on top is not tameh be'etzem. How will he get it off? Okay, so he's in the box now. He's hovering over the kever. But what's he supposed to do? He can't stick his hand out. It'll become tameh. The box is protecting him. If he sticks his hand out, he becomes tameh meis. So says the Gemara, how does he gain access to the food? Says the Gemara, we learned about this in Maseches Shabbos. Pshute kli eitz are very flat pieces of wood, kind of like when you go to the store, those paint mixer things. Those are very flat pieces of wood. Those are not considered kalim. We don't consider them a kli, and they're not makabel tuma. So they're basically his version of chopsticks. He takes them, hands still inside the box. He reaches out, he picks up the food with his little chopsticks, and he brings them back inside. That's how this can be accessible, and how this din of Rabbi Yehuda on the top of the Yamud could be actually true, where the food's on top of the kever and you can still get it. Says the Gemara, no. We learned, and Rashi highlights this as well, that tumas ohel doesn't need to be a kli at the top. As long as what's at the top is a tefach, and you are under that same thing, tameh. So let's say that you have a tefach wide piece of wood, 2 tefach wide pieces of wood, and you're using them to pick up the food. But the second you do that, there's tumas ohel, and you're touching it. So you're going to become tameh tumas ohel. So how would that work? It says the Gemara, demaisi la, it says achore, years to change, achude. What we're talking about here is very thin pieces of wood. So therefore, because they're very thin pieces of wood, they're not a tefach wide. Tumas ohel doesn't apply when it's not a tefach wide, and therefore we're back to a clean scenario of how we're able to do that. So it says the Gemara, ihachi, if that's true, my time of derabanan, why in our Mishnah does the Tanna Kama not agree with Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Yehuda said it can even be on the kever, no problem. Shida tebu migdal, pshute kli eitz, and they're achude, they're thin. very thin chopstick type devices. They're made out of wood. Great. So then why would the Rabbanan not allow it? What's the problem? Says the Gemara, kasavre in the plural, kasavre, they hold aser liknos bayis be'isure hana. You're not allowed to benefit. Rashi highlights this in more detail, but the point is that you're not allowed to benefit at all from a mace. So if you're not allowed to benefit from a mace, but having your food on top of this kever, you're benefiting from the mace. You put your eruv there, you're benefiting from the mace. Says the Gemara, don't worry. Pause. So there, the Gemara says the reason why the Rabbanan argue with Rabbi Yehuda is because they were of the opinion that you were not allowed to get hana from the kever, and therefore they said if you have food on top of the kever having nothing to do with the tomb of the Kohen, you're right. We could have solved the tomb of the Kohen problem the same way Rabbi Yehuda did. That's fine. The problem is that you can't get hana from a kever. What's implied from there? Michlal, 8 lines down, Lamed Aleph, Lamed Aleph, Michlal, to Rabbi Yehuda Savar Mutter. Does that seem to imply that Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's mutter to benefit from a mace, from the kever? Are you allowed to do that? That's not allowed. So says the Gemara, Kasavar, no. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion, mitzvos lav lehanos nitnu. Famous Shas Sugya, the mitzvos are not meant for hana. So what does that mean? You're doing the mitzvah of Eruv. We make a bracha when we make an Eruv, right? On the bracha of, let's say, Eruv Chatzeros, whatever it is. So there, because you're doing a mitzvah, it's not considered a hana, klape the mace. You're doing a mitzvah, and mitzvahs are lav lehanos nitnu. So the Rabbanan argued argued with Rabbi Yehuda. They said they were of the opinion that it's not allowed because you're getting hana, and it seems to be that the Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion. What are you talking about, Rabbanan? It's mutter, mitzvahs lav lehanos nitnu. Says the Gemara, if that's true, that we hold mitzvahs lav lehanos nitnu, then what does it seem like? It seems like our Mishnah has a machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda about who holds mitzvos lehanos nitnu, mitzvos lav lehanos nitnu. It seems that Rabbi Yehuda said mitzvos lehanos nitnu. That's what's implied, at least. He implied that the problem wasn't mitzvos lav lehanos nitnu. The problem was that you had it on top of a kever. You can't benefit from the kever. So says the Gemara, that's a problem if you say there's a machlokas tanaim, because when Rava presented it, he presented it simplistically that there was only one shita. Elahada amar Rava mitzvos lav lehanos nitnu. Why didn't we see over there lema kitanai amar lishmaisei? Maybe we should have said over there that there was a machlokas tanaim, but we didn't do that. We said glat, that he held one way. Seemingly everyone's opinion is that way. So why would Rava have said that? Amar lach Rava, what would Rava have said? If it would have been the case that they would have held that we only make an eruv for a dvar mitzvah, then of course it would have been permissible to put it on top of the kever. Really, what is the deeper machlokas? Says the Gemara, Mar savar ein me'arvin elo ledvar mitzvah, Mar savar me'arvin afilu ledvar harushu. So really, the machlokas is not about mitzvahs lav lehanos ninu. Everyone agrees about mitzvahs lav lehanos ninu. The question is, why were you using the eruv? If you were using the eruv for a rishus, so then Rabbi Yehuda says, then the Rabbanan says that's not allowed. So you shouldn't be doing it, because if you're doing it for the wrong reason, then it's usher. If you're doing it because you want to be able to play basketball outside, no, you're not allowed to do that. That's where the Rabbanan said you can't put it on top of the kever. Mashe'en kain, umar savar ma'arvin afilu lidvar rishus. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it should be mutter to put something on top of the kever, because no matter what your purpose is, it's mutter to use an eruv for things that are not ledvar mitzvah, even if they're dvar shus, it's mutter. Well, if that's true, says the Gemara, then it seems like there's a machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda in regards to how to use an eruv, but that doesn't work according to Rabbi Yosef, because Elahadr Amar Rabbi Yosef, ein ma'arvin elo ledvar mitzvah. Why did Rabbi Yosef say it so simplistically that it was just one shita? It seems like everyone seems to agree with Rabbi Yosef that what? What does he say? Ein ma'arvin elo ledvar mitzvah. So why did we just say that our machlokas Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda, why would we have said that that's a machlokas tanaim? Seemingly Rabbi Yosef didn't seem to think it was a machlokas tanaim. Answers the Gemara, Amar lach Rabbi Yosef, no. Dekule alma, really everybody holds ein ma'arvin elo ledvar mitzvah. Really, everybody holds no. You can only use an eruv for a dvar mitzvah. Rashi gives as an example to go to a base avel. I believe that's what Rashi said. Base avel. Yeah. Just look at it. Where is that? Sixth wide line. I knew I marked it off somewhere. Yeah. He says ve'ein ma'arvin Rashi dibra maskal lav lehanos ninu ve'ein ma'arvin ela ledvar mitzvah laleches lebeis ha'avel or lebeis ha'mishta. Yeah. Yeah, he does say. Yeah. What's that?
It clearly says base off.
That's for sure. The source of Shas points to the Rashash. Maybe it wasn't Shabbos, maybe it was Yantif. I don't know. Even then.
Even so.
I know, but we normally say Shabbos. I don't know if it applies Yom Tov Sheni. I don't know, I'm not sure. Because
Well,
we
Yom Tov
used,
would-
back in the day, it was customary to bury people on Yom Tov Sheni. So it could be that there's an application that it's mutter. Could be. Don't know. Great question. I missed that. So anyway, says the Gemara that Ela Hada Amar Rav Yosef. So then the Gemara says Amar Lach Rav Yosef, halfway down Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. What would Rav Yosef say to whether or not there was a machlokas? He said, no. To Kulei Alma Ein Ma'arvin Ela Lidvar Mitzvah. The only time you can make an eruv is when you're doing so for a mitzvah. Udukule alma mitzvahs lav lehanos ninu. Everyone agrees to that as well. That mitzvahs are lav lehanos ninu. Uvehakam. What are the Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda arguing about in our Mishnah, where the Rabbanon don't allow the food to be placed on the kever, and Rabbi Yehuda does allow for it? So says the Gemara, Mar Savar Kevan dekana le'eruv lo nicha le'demintera. One shita is of the opinion that once the holiday kicks in, once Ben Hashmashos begins, I no longer care about that food. That's fine. I don't care about it at all. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, who would be the second opinion, I do care that the food gets protected. So according to the Rabbanon, I don't want to come up with this whole concocted thing for food that we don't even care about. I'm not risking everything for this Kohen. It's not worth it. Rabbi Yehuda says that food is edible. So I did come up with this whole process. And what's important from this Gemara is a number of points. First of all, that it seems that in fact there is no machlokas about being ma'ariv l'dvar mitzvah, that is how we are supposed to be ma'ariv, only l'dvar mitzvah, but not for dvar rishus. It also seems very clear from our Gemara that we hold mitzvahs lav lehanos ninu, which is pretty, I believe, a staple of understanding and certainly clear from here. And last but not least is the machlokas is based on something more technical, which is the mechanism of the eruv, is that once that eruv breaks through bein hashmashos, totally useless or useful. That's machlokas Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda.
I wouldn't be able to follow how you put it on you put the food on a plank or something. It's too much ohel, and then you use chopsticks, and it's not too much.
It's not too much ohel if the wood that you're using is less than a tefach wide. That we learned last Masechta that too much ohel needs a roof that's at least a tefach.
Okay, so let's say you use the wood that's how wide?
Well, the problematic one is a tefach, and the non-problematic one is going to be less than a tefach.
So if it's a tefach, how's it too much ohel? I mean, it goes from the bottom, and the tumah goes
Exactly. The tumah will go from the bottom to the wood, and then come back down on you, the kohen, and that would be problematic. And you're holding it, so what your bottom side of your hand is now under the ohel.
For some reason, I thought it was the food that's going home. It's the cone.
But you're also doing the food, but the food is not the problem. The problem is the mace, the food's on top of the kever. That was the case on the top of the Amud. It says, Ma'arvin l'kohen tar b'truma tehora b'kever. So when the food's on top of the kever, if you were to take very thick planks of wood and you're using them as your chopsticks, no, you're matame tumasos and deresa. The kohen's going to become tummy. So that couldn't work according to anybody. So if Yehuda had to come up with a new kimta that the wood was not that thick. The wood had to be less than a tefach, otherwise it would have been tumasohel. Sure. New Mishnah. What other things can we be ma'arev with? Says the Gemara, ma'arvin b'dmai. We're allowed to make an eruv out of food that is b'dmai. We're not sure if the Am Ha'aretz was ma'aser. We can also be ma'arev with ma'aser rishon shenit la truma, so from food from which we took the truma. Uva ma'aser sheni v'hekta sheniftu. As well, we can take it from ma'aser sheni where there was a pidyon that was done. V'akohanim v'chalo v'truma, from the bread and from the truma of a kohen. Avalo b'tevel, we're not allowed to use tevel. V'lo b'ma'aser rishon shalom nitchachumaso. These all seem obvious. We're also not allowed to use some ma'aser rishon when the truma was not taken from it. V'lo b'ma'aser sheni v'hekta shalom niftu. That's not only obvious, but it's also the backhanded implications of the beginning of the Mishnah. So the Gemara is going to be bothered by this as well. Demai, says the Gemara, 3-4 lines from the bottom of Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph. I don't understand. Halo chazile. You can't eat demai, says the Gemara. No, and we saw this svara earlier. I don't remember where, but we've seen it before. Maybe it says where. It's in Brachos Mem Zayin, and it's also in Shabbos Kufchav Zayin, and in a couple of other places. Okay, so says the Gemara, demai. Why is it that demai is allowed to be eaten? Because, answers the Gemara, migu di'iboy mafkir luhu l'nichsei v'hava'ani v'chazi luhu. Because in theory, a person could be mafkir. They could relinquish all of their own property to the point that they halachically become an ani. And then an ani is shaykh to eat demai, as we will see shortly in a brisa, in a mishnah. So therefore, hashtanami chazile, because it's a theoretical possibility, because I could have liquidated all of my assets from a halachic perspective. So shaykh, if you're allowed to do that on Shabbos, the Rishonim discuss, is this only theoretical as it relates to Shabbos, or could one in theory be mafkir something on Shabbos? Is it in the world of kinyanim? Is it not in the world of kinyanim? So then the Gemara says here that that's why demai is permissible. How do we know that this is true? Ditnan, the Mishnah writes, that's pretty simple. You're allowed to give poor people demai. Continues the Mishnah on the top of Lamed Aleph on the base, demai, and as well for an achsanya. Rashi, achsanya, chayalos malchi Yisrael shematilan osan al b'nei ha'ir lezonan v'ahavu lehu ke'anim sharei einan bevateim. These people don't really have a place to live. They're soldiers. They're kind of like feeding the poor, and they themselves don't have a place to live, so they're treated like aniyim, and therefore we're allowed to give them demai. So basically, the achsanya is not our point. Obviously, the point is the aniyim. So because I could be mafkir all of my nechasim and make myself an ani, therefore demai is mutter for me. Amar Rav Huna, let me give you a little background. Says Rav Huna Tana, we have in the Mishnayos, Beis Shammai Omrim ein ma'achilin esaniyim demai. Of course, we don't paskin like him, but Beis Hillel Omrim ma'achilin esaniyim demai. So that's the full picture of the Mari Makomos, where we have Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Of course, we paskin like Beis Hillel, and that's why we're allowed to eat demai, because I could have liquidated my rights to my food, and all would have been poor, and therefore I could have benefited from the demai. Says the Gemara, what about it says the Mishnah in our Mishnah, V'maisa Rishon shenit la trumasa. Says the Gemara, thank you. Well, of course, if you're ma'aser your food properly, of course you could partake. Of course you could use it as an eruv. Why would we not be able to do that? Says the Gemara, pshita, that's obvious. Fourth line, lo, that's not correct. Tzricha, we need this case, just in general. Lo tzricha is usually not actually lo tzricha. It's lo, common. No. Tzricha, we actually need this case. Shegdimu b'shibolin v'nat lamimenu trumas meiser. This is when a Levi, really, he should not be taking first. The Kohen should be taking first. So the Levi jumped the gun. Higdimu b'shibal, and at a very early phase, when it was not yet by miruach hakri, it was not yet all collected and smoothed out. And he took his portion first. But not let me minute trumas meiser, but lo not let me minute truma gdola. So he only took his portion of trumas meiser, but still truma gdola had not been taken. Rabbi Abahu, Amaresh Lakish, Rabbi Abahu, Amaresh Lakish, Meiser Rishon Sheikdimu b'Shibalin. If you have a case where the Levi went first and took from the Shibalin stage, Pater mi Truma Gedola, there's no longer a requirement at that point to take Truma Gedola. Wow. Okay, so we skirted. I mean, it's usher, but I don't know if it's usher formally, but it's not right. And we skirted Truma Gedola. Why is it true that you're Pater from Truma Gedola? Shnei Amar. That's the pasuk, and the drasha is Meiser mina Meiser amarti lach, v'lo truma gedola v'trumas Meiser mina Meiser. You can't take truma gedola from that which was already tithed. That the truma gedola has to be first. So if the Levi came along and took the trumas Meiser, so then we don't later go along and say that and take the truma gedola, and therefore that's why this case is brought. That's why this case is not so obvious, because we're talking about a case where the Levi took his portion first, and now we're no longer able to take the Truma Gdola. Afal Pikein, still mutter to use for an Eruv. Amar le Rav Papa le Abaye. Rav Papa says to Abaye, this question and answer will come up again in a few lines, but what does Rav Papa ask Abaye? Ihachi, if this is true, maybe even later in the process, Afilu Higdimu, even if the Levi would have taken out his portion of Trumas Meiser, B'kri Nami, maybe we should have said that even after the food was smoothed out, maybe there we should have said that if the Levi would have taken his Trumas Meiser, that we would no longer take Truma Gdola. So tell me the Chiddush at a more Mechudash place. Don't tell me the Chiddush when it's B'Shibal and in the earlier phase. Tell me the case when it's B'Kri, when it's already been smoothed out. Says the Gemara, no, that doesn't work. Amar le alecha amar kra, your case, mikol masrosechem tarimu as kol Trumas Hashem. That's not true. But when it comes, the pasuk is referencing the fact that once we are B'Kri, once the food has been smoothed over, we would no longer use the above drasha to say that Truma Gdola cannot be taken. So therefore, if in the stage of the Kri, the Levi jumps the gun, he's Hiktimu Bekri, and he takes the Trumas Meiser, we'd still be Chayiv in Truma Gdola, and therefore, in that case, we would not be able to use that food as an Eruv. If the Levi jumps the gun, once it's already been smoothed out, there we cannot use that as an Eruv because Truma Gdola is still Chayiv. Mashein came earlier, based on the drashas we saw above, that we would be allowed to use that food, because if before Miruach Hakri, before the food is smoothed out, the Levi took his Trumas Meiser, we can no longer bring Truma Gdola, and therefore that food is now permissible to use for an Eruv. Says the Gemara, Uma Reis, I don't understand. What did you see to make the distinction where the Levi in the earlier phase there we said that the Truma Gedola is no longer chayiv. And here, once Miruach HaKri took place, once the pile of Meiser food, or which would have been food from which we would have taken Meiser, once it was smoothed out, we would give Truma Gedola. Says the Gemara, Hai Idgan, V'hai Lo Idgan. One is considered Dagan, and the other is not considered Dagan. Take a look at Rashi. This Rashi is about 12 lines down from the top of the page. Dibur Hamaschil, Hai. Says Rashi, Hai Hikdimu Bikri Idgan. When it's already smoothed out, it's considered a grain. The kevan denikra dagan nasa tevel truma. Once you have the status of dagan, so now we have tevel. And in such a case, you still need to bring the truma gdola. Continues Rashi v'ilo idgan v'chishak levi adayin lo haya tevel truma. At that phase, we weren't even in the status of tevel yet. So therefore, that's the distinction to be made: is one is called grain and one is not called grain. Says the Gemara almost halfway down on Lamed Aleph Amud Beis. Says the Gemara Meiser Sheni B'Hektish Sheniftu. In that case too, once you did everything right, if you were poda properly, all should be good. Of course, you should be able to be ma'ariv with that food. Pshita. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not correct. There is a chiddush here. Tzricha. What's the case? Shenasan esa Karesh esa keren v'lo nasan esa chomesh. That we know that when a person is poda, they have to add 25%. It's referred to as chomesh, but it's only chomesh after you've added. So when you add, is that right? Yeah, that's correct. There'll be 5/4 effectively. So that would be basically be an extra chomesh, an extra fifth, and that really would make it 125 or 1.25, whatever the math is. And we were afraid the kamash malan that the ena chomesh ma'akev, that if you only paid the principal but not the extra, we were concerned havamina that maybe that would have been ma'akev your pidyon. And we would have said that food could no longer be used for Eruv, Kamash Malan, that even if you don't pay the Chomesh, even if you don't pay the 25% extra, even if you don't, that food can still be used for Eruv. Avaloba Tevel, continuing from the Mishnah that we learned in the previous Amud. Obviously, thank you very much. We know that Tevel is also to eat. From Pshita, says the Gemara, thank you. We knew that already. Look, that's not correct. You really don't know what you're talking about. Tzricha, we actually needed it, but Tevel, Tevel Midrabanan. You're right. Had it been Tevel Midoraisa, Leisman de Palag, everyone would agree that if it was going to be Tevel Doraisa, that you're not allowed to use that for an Eruv. That's for sure. But what if the status of Tevel was only Midrabanan? Would we have said that that's Ma'ake for an Eruv? So let's see. Says the Gemara, Lo, Tzricha b'Tevel Tevel Midrabanan. What's a case of Tevel that is only Tevel Midrabanan? Uchagon shezira'o be'atzitz she'eino nakuv. We learned about this already in the previous Maseches Shabbos. An atzitz she'eino nakuv is a flower pot that does not have a hole on the bottom. And when it does not have a hole on the bottom, so then it's not yonik from the earth itself, but at the same time, it is kind of sort of growing vegetation, right? So therefore, what we do is we give it a status of Tevel. You have to be ma'aser, the food that grows in that enclosed flower pot, even when there's no hole on the bottom, it's atzitz she'eino nakuv. You're still obligated to give meiser, albeit midrabanan. So the question was, havamina, when the Mishnah said that by Tevel, it's so obvious you're not allowed to use Tevel. Of course you can't use Tevel. Says the Gemara, slow down. Maybe it's only Tevel derabanan. And that's the chiddush, is a kamash malan, that even if it's only midrabanan, afal pikein, you're still not allowed to use it for an Eruv. Good. And the Mishnah says there that if you did not take off the truma from the Meiser Rishon, you're not allowed. Pshita, obviously. It says, no, that's not true. Tzricha shehikdimu bekriv and not lamimenu trumas Meiser, not lamimenu truma gedola. Maybe you might have thought that at that later point, which we discussed earlier, which is bekriv and not lamimenu trumas Meiser, not lamimenu truma gedola. This was actually our case above, but now we're learning it in the reverse. We initially asked this question above when we said that if you did the truma right, why would it be a problem? And there we said because maybe the Levi chapta Rein early, and therefore you would have thought that it wasn't allowed because you would have thought it wasn't allowed because truma gedola wasn't taken, and we answered there the truma gedola can be taken. Here we're saying it in the negative. Here we're saying that if you did not do the truma correctly, then you're not allowed to do it. Lo tzricha. What's the chiddush case? The chiddush case is if you would have done it at the time of the kri. If you do it at the time of the kri, you are still chayiv in that case, and therefore you're not allowed to. You are still chayiv in trumas meiser in that case, and therefore in Truma Gdola, excuse me, because you're still chayiv in Truma Gdola, you cannot use that for an Eruv Mahu Detema. You might have thought, like the question we saw above from Rav Papa to Abai, Kid Amarle, Rav Papa le Abai, Kamash Malam Kiddashani le, because we saw the pasuk above that says no, you're still chayiv in Truma Gdola. If when the Levi took what he took, and he shouldn't have taken at that earlier phase, if he took it after Miruach Hakri, so even though the Levi he took before the Kohen, which is not right, that's not right. But the question is, does it invalidate? And we said, you're still not allowed to do that. It's still usher to do that. If the Levi takes by the Kri, by the time when it's Miruach HaKri, so then we're still chayiv to bring Truma Gedola, and that's what the Gemara answered, Kamash Malan Kedeshani Lan, that therefore you're not allowed to use that as an Eruv as well. Is this just last case? Last case. Until the Mishnah, then we're going to stop for tonight. The lo b'maiser sheni v'hektish shelo niftu. What about the case of Pidyon? We said that if you were not poded, then you're not allowed. Pshita, obviously. Says Gemara lo, that's not correct. Tzricha. But what case do we need to learn from the Mishnah in the negative here when it says you're not allowed? Shepidan. You did the pidyon. V'lo pidan kihil chasan. Let's say that you did the pidyon, but you did a bad job of doing the pidyon. How could you do a bad job of the pidyon? Because meiser shepitao al gabe asimon. We learned about this a number of times already. An asimon is a coin that is very smooth and has no images on it. But that doesn't work because when you're being poded, it has to be on a coin that has images on it. V'rachmana amar v'tzarta kesef. You need to have an engraving in the kesef. Kesef sheyesh alav tzura. Mashein came with an asimon which has nothing, so you did the pidyon wrong. So if you did the pidyon wrong, havamina, that even though you did the pidyon wrong, it's still considered a pidyon and you're allowed to use the food for an eruv. Kamash malan, that's not true. You have to do it right. It has to be on a coin that has an image. And another way that you could do this wrong is hektish shechilu al gav karka. Let's say that you were mechalal hektish. You tried to transfer it over to karka. Says the Gemara, no, you can't do that. Rachmana amar v'nasana kesef v'kama. It has to be done on money. We don't do it on things that aren't metatzel, and it has to be done on money. It has to be done with money that actually has something on it. So all of these cases are an analysis of the Mishnah from the previous page, where we analyze Demai and Meiser Rishon both with and without Truma, and we analyze Meiser Sheni with and without the appropriate Pidyon. We did not discuss the case of Kohanim and Chalav and Truma, which the Mishnah assumed to be obvious. We spoke a little bit about Tevel, the distinction between Tevel Derais and Tevel Derabanan. The Chiddush of Tevel Derabanan is that it's still going to be a problem as it relates to Eruv. And then as well, we spoke about a case of Meiser Sheni where you did not do the Pidyon right. And that is a wrap for tonight. We are going to start with the next Mishnah tomorrow night, Emir Tashem, to learn Eruvin Daf Lamed Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night. And everybody come down tomorrow.
Shkoyach. Good Shabbos.
Oh, we're learning a and a half tomorrow. Oy.
There you go. See, I reminded you.
So did Michael.
But I said good Shabbos already.
You did. You're a big tzaddik. Thank God the Amud Aleph on Lamed Gimel is a little short, so we'll figure it out. Have a good night, everybody.
Do we count for Marv through Zoom?
No.
Not quite, but that question was asked to our personal Schechter. He said you're allowed to answer the Dvarim Shevik Dusha, even though you're not in the room, which is a little unique. Can answer.
Well, you keep going until Ma'ariv.
Yeah, you took a poll.
Nah.
All the evenings. That's what I mean. Oh, I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
Another 15 minutes. You can continue.
Could be. I would have prepared for it.
Uh,
How are you?
Good night.
Everybody.